So maybe, as Noam Chomsky says, the best thing to start with is to make sure that everyone can hear me. Can everyone? Thumbs up? Okay, awesome. All right, so my name is Nahla Salem. I'm a senior product manager in Yelp. I've been in product roles for 12 years and in machine learning roles for about 8 years. I have a mix of technical and business background, so I will try to bring that together to you today and talk to you about how you can get the most out of machine learning for your product. I actually love the questions that you had, so I'll try to make the talk as short as possible and then go next to questions. All right. I'll start by telling you who this talk is for, just to get our bearings, and then I'll try and give you some symptoms that you might be witnessing in your companies or in your teams, and then give you some food for thought as to how you can make things better. Each one of these symptoms can probably be a talk in and of its own, but I think I'll just try to give you some keys to dealing with different situations, and I'll summarize and give you some advice at the end. Okay, so who is this talk for? So this is for product folks or product-minded folks that have a machine learning team that they feel can be a bit more productive. So let me start by asking you, do you think in your companies, maybe let's do a show of hands, you have achieved the potential of ML? Okay, so I guess it's quite a cautious audience, I would say. That would be my personal answer. It's also a tough question to answer, and I think we'll start to get into why that is the case. So what does success look like? Maybe let's talk a little bit about that so that we know whether or not we have it. So this might look like a totally random set of products, but what I think is common here is two things. First of all, machine learning was used in a way that serves strategic goals, solves real customer problems, and also at the same time, it's part of a smooth user experience and is not in your face, so to say. So the famous story of Netflix using movie recommendations, so a product recommender algorithm, in order to move a traditionally very hard metric to move, which is retention, is sort of a classic in machine learning. We also have in the banking industry a lot of algorithms that are used to directly affect revenue and P&L by doing things like risk management. Okay, so let's jump right into some symptoms that you might be seeing. So the first one is obviously a very rare thing that we can witness, which is having too many meetings. I know that most product managers think that they have too many meetings, but I'm sort of a bit cheekily trying to describe a situation where you feel that there's just so much overhead associated with you trying to even answer the question of whether machine learning is good for a certain area or a feature. And my advice here would be maybe counterintuitive, but it will be to review your team structure. And because I really think that this is important and makes a big difference. So I am a huge fan of cross-functional teams. There are different ways to do them, and I'll try to be as brief as possible, as I mentioned, but I really think that if you set aside the technical associations and you put folks that are smart and have different technical backgrounds, have the cross-functional skills, and put them in a team that is cross-functional, autonomous, focused on a certain problem area, and build over time user empathy and a deep understanding of the problem area, you will get the best results. You can find inspiration in Spotify's model. They have written on their engineering blog about one way of doing cross-functional teams. You can also go back to Marty Kagan's empowered product teams, all saying the same thing. And I just want to stress the fact that you can see that this is on Spotify's engineering blog. So most of us think about team structure, especially technical team structures, as something that's related to efficiency. But my point here is this is actually related to effectiveness, because this actually ends up determining what type of problems you use machine learning to solve. And I can get into that later in the questions period. The second symptom is, oh, it seems to be taking forever to do anything with machine learning. Well, this might not necessarily be a bad thing. It sort of, it might be, but it also depends on your reference point. So the development life cycle for machine learning is quite different. So for regular software engineering, you define a product, you define a problem, and then you design a solution, and then you implement that solution. I'm generalizing here, of course. But in machine learning, you really have a lot more ambiguity and uncertainty, and you need to answer a couple of questions along the way, which are, is machine learning even possible to be used for this problem or not? And then it might be, but then the next question would be, do we have enough data to be able to build a machine learning feature? And then the third question is going to be, okay, we have the data, but can we actually build the model that beats the status quo or improves the status quo? So as you can see, it comes with a lot of uncertainty and ambiguity. So it's best to plan ahead, and you can do that by planning in your roadmap time for research or POCs. Some people maintain a research roadmap in addition to the feature roadmap. I would recommend combining the two, but different people do different things, and also plan data gathering. So this is a culture that just needs to be there, and over time it ends up being the case. So where I work in Yelp, we don't need to explain to stakeholders anymore that there's going to be a period of 3 months of randomized data gathering. We might have conversations around sort of the pros and cons, because randomized data gathering might mean sacrificing some revenue or some sort of metric that we care about, but over time the culture builds up that this is just the way that things need to happen. The third symptom is it seems that we are building features, but we are not adding the best customer value. Again, cheekily, I'm calling this the .ai phenomenon, although from the questions in the last session, it seems that the audience is quite aware of that. But what I will say here briefly is that machine learning is a very powerful tool, but then the risk of having a powerful tool like a hammer is that every problem looks like a nail. And in order to get around that, it's important to keep in mind that there are fancy machine learning problems, and then there is customer value, and where the two overlap is great. But if they don't, then you need to be prioritizing customer value, and you instill that culture by having people that understand both sides of the business and the technical worlds. And the fourth symptom actually came up also in the questions, which is the customers don't seem to be trusting our machine learning features, especially in an enterprise setting. In a consumer setting, it's probably more hidden. So I've worked in the past on a forecasting product, and we witnessed an interesting phenomenon. We saw that the users were able to override the forecasting that we presented, and they did so. But then over time, they actually didn't do that as much. They trusted the product and the algorithm more, and the algorithm got more with time. So you need to keep in mind that change is a process, and you might want to plan for it, and you might also want to build features for it. So like the previous speaker said, something also I've done in the past, which is you have to have a plan B. If the accuracy is low, for example, then you can go into a sort of a status quo feature. You can build user trust by allowing them to interact with your product a little bit more, such as the overriding that I mentioned, or by things like the setting of values in business rules. The fifth symptom is it seems that we have a machine learning team and they're producing maybe data analysis for us and giving maybe recommendations, but we don't seem to be able to deliver any big features. And if you're just starting out, then that's not necessarily a bad thing. I would say that this is actually a good thing. I think it's best to start small. And then it's best to test. And by test, I don't mean your features, I mean your process. Because integrating machine learning into software is a thing, and you need to do maybe a little bit of a change in culture, perhaps a change in team structure, like we mentioned. So that's something to keep in mind. And then you need to iterate. Perhaps after data analysis, you can go into a quick win and then feel that you are more ready for a bigger feature. So in summary, I would love to tell you to be conscientious about team structure. Again, it doesn't just affect efficiency, it does affect the effectiveness of your machine learning use. Focus on value proposition versus technology and keep iterating that mantra to your teams. Set expectations both for yourselves, your stakeholders, and your customers regarding things like change management and the different stuff we talked about. And also ask for help, especially if if you're just starting out and don't have in-house machine learning experience. I was in a startup before, and they didn't ask for help, and they ended up hiring the wrong people. And I was in another startup, and we fell on our network. It was myself and two other people doing interviewing for the people that we are going to hire into our startup. That came from our network to help us out, and that team is still there and productive as we speak. So it does make a big difference. As I mentioned, there is a lot to be said on all of these things, and this is my website. I have a blog over there as well, and I have some blog posts about the different things we touched on today if you want more information. Thank you so much for listening. Let's do questions.
Do we have any questions from the audience?
So I was wondering, I wanted to know your take on ethical issues and if they arise often when you have machine learning embedded as part of your product or feature, and kind of how do you manage that?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think one that we do not often think about. In my personal experience, it hasn't come that often because my experience is almost entirely in enterprise. I think ethical issues tend to come up more often in consumer products. But from my readings, I know that you need to be aware of implicit biases in your data. So, for example, if you are doing a mortgage product like we mentioned, and you use seemingly unbiased criteria to judge a person coming in, this might end up having implicit bias because in North America, different places or different neighborhoods can have minorities and others don't. So by just getting an address or a zip code, you might actually be training your model on implicit bias data, and there are research methods to counter that. But yeah, depending on the type of product that you have. Yeah. Other questions?
My question is around the structure of teams, right? And this is sort of a problem I have today. So have teams working on discrete business problems, and a possible solution we might need might be an ML type solution. However, we have ML people like in another team. They're like in another world off to the side. I don't always need an ML person, but I need an ML person when I need an ML person. So how do you build a structure to support that?
Yeah, that was a classic problem also that I faced while being in startups, because, unlike Google, you're not going to have the capacity or the resources to have a machine learning person embedded in every product development team. So it's quite common. And I think the way that I've dealt with in the past and found to be quite successful is to simulate the cross-functional team outside of the reporting structures. So, for example, you're planning ahead and you have it in your roadmap, and you know that in this quarter or in this epic or or a couple of sprints, we're going to need a machine learning person. Then take one person or however you want, however many you want, and embed them in the product development team for that period, and try and construct a sort of tiger team that is cross-functional, that is comprised of the machine learning person or people and the software development person or people that are going to be working on that problem for the duration that you have assigned. With machine learning, it's usually not less than a quarter, so it sort of works out. Have them attend the rituals together. If you have team names, then create a new team name. Create a Slack channel for that team. Just try to simulate as much as possible that this is an actual team. Spotify sort of does that, so you might also find inspiration in what they're doing. But the way that they talk about it is a bit more longer term. But what I've done in the past is what I described, which can be, sort of tiger teams. And then the second thing I would say is this sometimes creates discomfort on the engineering side. So immediately when you start talking about what I just mentioned, their heads are going to run into thinking about, maintainability. Who's going to own that code after that team goes back to their home teams? And that's a real concern. This is why with team structures, there's no right and wrong answer. You just need to understand the pros and cons and then build for the cons. I think it's much easier to deal with issues like maintainability, and if you're conscious of it, especially beforehand, than with issues such as the lack of innovation or the lack of effectiveness of the feature. So hopefully that's helpful. Any other questions?
Thanks for the answer. That was a really good tip on the team building, the simulating teams. We struggle with the same thing. And I just wanted to ask about the duration of the work. I think one challenge we've had is ML projects tend to take a lot longer than traditional development. And so if you simulate that team, how do you keep the rest of the development team from not getting bored during that process or moving on to a new story or topic?
So you mean you have a sort of original product development team, and you don't want them to get bored while a part is working on the machine learning problem?
Yeah, that's right. Given the duration, I'm assuming is slower for the ML work.
Yeah. So you're worried about the product development team rather than the stakeholders, correct?
Yeah, I think it's the extension of your response for the simulated cross-functional team. Like if you build that team together, but they have different cadences, how does that team all stay active on the same problem while one project might take 2 months and another one might take a couple weeks?
Yeah, that's a great question, and if I'll add more color just to prove your point that this is a real problem. Usually, different engineering folks are going to have different roles in a machine learning feature at different points in time. So you might need a data engineer at the beginning that is going to be working on the data gathering and data analysis, and then they're not going to have much to do after. And then you might have a back-end engineer that's responsible for productizing a model, but they have sort of zero interest in the data gathering phase. So it needs active management, and I think that's part of why folks don't naturally adopt that structure, because it needs way more active management than just setting teams and letting them do their thing over years. But it can be managed. So in my experience, what I've done in the past is to try and have the team be a team and constructed having everybody from the beginning, even if someone is going to be disappearing at certain points in time. So definitely in important milestones, in perhaps monthly touch bases, you have everyone in the room, and the data engineer can come at the beginning and be quite involved, and then maybe only come in when we're doing the rituals at the end, or wrapping things up, just to give their point of view, make sure there are no bugs, etc. And it works. But also what I have found to be interesting is that when you have everyone in the room and you're ideating over problems, that's when the best ideas come up. Innovation is not my strong point, so the best ideas that came in my products have usually been from engineers that I have given a setup in which they are exchanging ideas together. We were working on a product once, a challenging NLP problem, and there were different ways to design the user experience. And actually, one of the best ideas that came up in that conversation was from a software engineer that was part of the Tiger team that did not have anything to do with machine learning, but she was there and felt that she was building experience and also contributing by ideating over a problem, and that sort of kept her engaged. And the last point that works in your favor is, frankly, a lot of people have interest in machine learning. So actually, going back to that lady that I just mentioned, she had wanted to become a machine learning engineer, so she loved being part of a team that was working even if she was not in active development at a certain point in time, but it did give her a good experience. So it's sort of an easier sell than the other way around. Of course.
My question is, in cases where while you're building your model, you need user input, how do you build in such a way that you can provide some immediate value but don't lose the customer or the user's trust while you're building out your model?
Mm-hmm. So if you want to give an example, or maybe I can rephrase your...
Say, for example, a couple of years ago, I was working on a tool to help for tech support. It was a chat assistant. So the customer was already chatting with an actual human, but at the same time, we're building out a model to help using the customer's input to provide more usable answers to the tech support real time. So the goal there was, how do we not lose that tech support's trust if we give the wrong answers while they're doing it? Because the goal there was to keep them engaged, able to help the user. Because one of the things we learned, because we were building out a call center, and it started out as voice. And then that was at the beginning of the pandemic. We realized all of a sudden, I think we started out with like 20% of our volume was text. And then once the pandemic started, it went to 60 overnight. All of a sudden, we're getting crashed. So we're trying to provide as much help as we could. But the tech assistants needed a lot more help than we could provide at the beginning. So we're building these models as fast as we could, but we didn't want to lose their trust. So how do you build real time and still maintain that trust?
Yeah. Okay. So I guess to summarize, like we just discussed, machine learning takes time to increase in their accuracy and performance, which means that some people are going to get less than optimal results at the beginning. So how do we deal with that? So that's a true concern, and I would recommend going back to the idea of crossing the chasm and the fact that your users/customers fall on a spectrum of appetite for innovation and new technology. And then your job as a product person becomes to find the customer segment to build for that has this tolerance, and perhaps not just tolerance, but actually excitement to trying something new out, even though it might have less than optimal results. And my experience has all been in enterprise, which obviously mistakes have a higher cost than in consumer products. But we were actually always able to find folks like that for many different reasons, including business reasons, such as they also want to make sure that they are on the cusp of new technology in their industry, that they affect how a feature gets built out. For example, if they are willing to be a part of an alpha test or a beta test with your product team. So I think through being close to your users and customers always, you will build a sense of who is more interested than others, and also through user research and user interviews, we were able to find that more clearly.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Chris?
Hello. Adding on to that question, how do you make sure you're not over-optimizing for the wrong user, right? If you're going to build ML products and select people who are most excited, how do you make sure you're not leaving people who aren't so excited out?
Yeah, that's a common product problem even outside of machine learning, that we tend to rely on user research, but then that sort of naturally optimizes for the loudest user. And I think this is when a mix of a quantitative and a qualitative approach would be very helpful. So sometimes what I would do in the past is we do sort of the quantitative thing, and we find from user metrics users that are not engaged, or even users that have churned, and then go after those and try and talk to them and understand what their problems were, versus the very different user persona that I was just talking about, which are the people that are very interested in what you're doing and are willing to take on risk themselves. So those are obviously two very different personas, and just in general paying attention to the metrics. So if you're down a path that is supported by qualitative user research, but your engagement metrics are not growing, for example, then this is when you need to be thinking more about combining the two. All right, I think that's the end of the questions. Thank you so much for listening. Hope that was helpful.